Have you ever returned home, expecting a quiet evening, only to be met with the sight of your life being demolished, literally? That's the shock that tore through me the moment I turned the corner and saw the towering bulldozer lodged halfway into what used to be my living room. My truck screeched to a halt as I flung open the door and sprinted across the street, heart pounding so hard it nearly drowned out the roaring engine. My front wall had already collapsed into splintered wood and broken glass, and clouds of thick dust curled up into the amber evening sky. The home I grew up in, the one my father built with bare hands, was being torn down like it was nothing more than an eyesore. And then I saw her, Patricia Keaton, standing there like she owned the place, which, as far as she was concerned, she probably did. Her bleached blonde bob was immaculately styled, her designer sunglasses glinting in the fading sunlight, and that smug little cardigan draped over her shoulders like she was the damn queen of the cul-de-sac. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just crossed her arms and watched my world burn with an expression that was one part amusement, one part contempt. "Oh, Greg," she said sweetly, "I didn't expect you back so soon." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some mistake. It was a message, one meant to break me. But she clearly had no idea who she was messing with. The rage in my chest surged like wildfire. I shoved past one of her sniveling HOA lackeys and marched straight toward her, barely able to contain the fury in my voice. "You bulldozed my house. Are you completely out of your mind?" She barely reacted, just scoffed, as if I'd asked her why the sky was blue. It was an eyesore, Greg. Honestly, it was bringing down the value of the neighborhood. We needed more parking space for our community events. I blinked. My brain struggled to process the absurdity of what she just said. You needed parking, so you demolished my home. My voice cracked, the raw emotion punching through. But Patricia just gave me another one of her signature sighs, the kind that oozed condescension. Your property was in violation of HOA standards. We sent multiple notices. You chose not to respond. That's not our fault. That's a damn lie. I snapped. I never received anything. She shrugged, already turning her back on me. Well, it's already done. You can take it up with the board if you like. The engine finally cut off, leaving behind an eerie silence and a pile of shattered memories. My home, the only thing I had left of my parents, was now nothing but rubble. And Patricia? She strutted away with all the grace of a villain exiting stage left. "Don't forget to clean up your debris, Greg," she called over her shoulder. "Wouldn't want to fine you for littering." The silence left behind was heavier than the dust in the air. My fists clenched so hard, my nails bit into my palms. She thought she had won. But what Patricia didn't know was that I don't lose. I rebuild, and I take down the people who try to destroy me, one stone at a time. The dust from the wreckage still hung in the air like the memory of a bad dream that refused to fade. I stood there, surrounded by shattered wood, twisted pipes, and broken glass, trying to steady my breath. My house, my home, was gone. Not from fire, not from storm, but from the ego of one power-drunk woman with a clipboard and a grudge. I wanted to scream, to call the police, to demand justice. But I knew better. Patricia Keaton didn't play fair. She didn't just have the HOA in her back pocket. She was the HOA. She controlled the board like a puppet master, pulling strings no one else could see. And I had no doubt she'd greased the palms of someone down at the zoning office, too. No, if I was going to take her down, I couldn't do it with outrage or fists. I had to outthink her. As I walked through the wreckage, something crunched underfoot. I looked down and found a broken picture frame. The glass cracked, but the photograph inside miraculously untouched. It was my parents, standing proudly in front of this very house on move-in day, smiling like they'd just conquered the world. That photo lit a fire in my chest stronger than anything Patricia could ever burn down. I grabbed my laptop from the truck and opened the county record site right there on the tailgate. Zoning laws, building codes, HOA bylaws. I combed through every line like a lawyer building a case. And that's when I found it. A shady little clause slipped into the minutes of the last HOA meeting. A so-called emergency resolution, passed conveniently while I was out of town for work. It falsely claimed my house had been abandoned and declared a structural liability. Based on that lie, the board had voted unanimously to reclaim the property for community improvement. And just like that, my home was rubble. The signatures were exactly who I expected. Patricia's inner circle of HOA disciples. But one name stood out, Leonard Grayson, the HOA treasurer. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't the type to destroy someone's home just for fun. If there was a crack in Patricia's perfect empire, he was it. And I intended to wedge myself into it like a crowbar. Finding Leonard wasn't difficult. He was exactly where I thought he'd be, half buried under the hood of his prized vintage Cadillac, in the same garage he'd been slowly restoring for as long as anyone could remember. Unlike Patricia's other loyal drones, Leonard had always been different, quiet, precise, the kind of man who tightened every bolt 3 times and wrote HOA memos with a fountain pen. If anyone had voted with hesitation or regret, it was him. He barely looked up as I approached, wiping grease from his hands with a red rag that was already more oil than cloth. "You've got guts showing up here, Greg," he muttered without malice. "I don't have time for pleasantries," I said, cutting to the chase. "Did you know they were going to bulldoze my house?" He paused, exhaled, and leaned against the car, eyes tired. I didn't have a choice. "There's always a choice," I snapped. He met my stare for the first time. "Not when Patricia has the board on a leash. You vote against her, you're out. No warning. No appeal. She'd tank my property value, or bury me in fines before I had time to blink." "So you just went along with it?" I asked, arms crossed, daring him to keep dodging the truth. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She said it was a done deal. Claimed the city approved it. Told us it was just a formality." "But you knew it was shady," I said, watching his guilt manifest in silence. "You felt it." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figured as much. But I didn't have proof. And going against Patricia without a plan? That's suicide." That's when I pulled out my phone and showed him the records I'd found. Public documents revealing Patricia's dirty little secret. She didn't own her house outright. In fact, she had a balloon mortgage coming due in just a few months, and she'd been hiding it. Her financial house of cards was about to come crashing down. Leonard's eyes widened. "You're telling me the queen of the HOA is drowning in debt?" I nodded, the plan already forming. "And I'm going to make sure she sinks." He let out a low whistle, equal parts amusement and disbelief. "You're either a genius or completely out of your mind. Maybe both." Leonard looked down at the wrench in his hand, then back at me. He paused, just for a beat, before extending that hand with a grease-stained grin. "If you're serious about taking her down, I'm in." I shook it, hard. "Then let's get to work." The days that followed felt like something out of a covert operation. Every move had to be deliberate, every step calculated. We weren't just dealing with an overreaching neighbor anymore. This was organized control wrapped in pastel cardigans and fake smiles. Patricia had built a kingdom of fear, one HOA citation at a time. Now, it was our turn to tear it down brick by brick. With Leonard now fully on board, I had access to the HOA's inner workings, something I'd never gotten on my own. And what we uncovered, it was worse than either of us expected. Patricia had been bleeding the HOA dry for years, hiding behind beautification projects and community initiatives that never materialized. We found receipts for lavish dinners billed as planning meetings, ridiculous invoices from shady contractors that all traced back to her brother-in-law, and inflated fines that she funneled into a special projects fund, which, as it turned out, was just a personal bank account in her maiden name. But we didn't stop at discovery. We weaponized the truth. Leonard and I assembled everything into a clean, anonymous packet. Financial statements, screenshots, hard proof of fraud. And then we mailed it to every homeowner in the neighborhood. The fallout was instant. People who'd been quietly tolerating the HOA's tyranny suddenly realized they'd been financing Patricia's lifestyle. Residents who'd been fined for chipped paint or wind chimes learned those fines helped pay for her new designer patio furniture. Phones lit up. Email threads exploded. By that weekend, neighbors were huddling on sidewalks, front lawns, and driveways, whispers turning into outcries. The power Patricia had once held so tightly began to crack, all thanks to one undeniable fact. She wasn't protecting the community. She was exploiting it. And we weren't done yet. Patricia wasn't just corrupt. She was reckless. Her obsession with appearances, with being the queen of the cul-de-sac, had come at a steep cost. She'd mortgage her property to the hilt to fund her faux empire, ornamental fences, imported garden stones, even a marble fountain she claimed was a community symbol. All of it bought on credit. And now, that debt was catching up with her. Thanks to Leonard's access and a real estate contact of mine, we traced her financial situation to the brink of collapse. She had a balloon mortgage, one of those dangerous loans where you make small payments now, but owe a massive sum all at once later. Patricia's balloon was about to burst. In 3 months, to be exact. I knew the bank holding her mortgage, so I made him an offer. It wasn't cheap. In fact, it cost me more than any house should. But this wasn't just real estate. This was poetic justice in brick and mortar. I officially acquired her mortgage debt and waited, quietly, patiently, while she continued hosting smug HOA meetings in a house that no longer belonged to her. She had no idea that the floorboard beneath her feet were already mine. And then on the deadline day, she missed her payment, just like we knew she would. Within hours, I filed the paperwork. Within days, I became the legal owner of Patricia Keaton's home. But I wasn't interested in flipping it or renting it. No, I had one specific purpose in mind. Because her house wasn't just a home, it was the HOA headquarters. And now, I was about to evict an entire dictatorship, starting with its queen. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be routine, just another display of Patricia's performative power. She strutted into the community clubhouse, which sat squarely inside her now former property, with the same smug smile she always wore, flanked by her minions like she was walking into a royal court. She had no idea that this meeting would be her last. As soon as she sat down and tapped her little gavel, yes, she actually used one, I stepped forward. "I'll take it from here," I said, loud enough for the entire room to go silent. Patricia blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" I held up a folder and walked to the front. "As of this morning, I am the legal owner of Patricia Keaton's property, including this building. Here's the deed." I unfolded it slowly, letting the legal seal catch the light. Gasps echoed. Murmurs rippled across the room. Patricia's face went pale, her mouth slightly agape. You can't do this." "Oh, but I can," I replied, calm as ever. "And since the HOA operates out of this property, and the board refuses to relocate, consider this your official eviction notice." Leonard stepped beside me, arms crossed, enjoying every second. And with the documentation of financial misconduct already distributed, I think it's safe to say the HOA is finished. Patricia turned to her usual allies, searching for backup, but they couldn't even meet her gaze. Their loyalty had collapsed like the rubble she left where my house once stood. By the end of that night, Patricia was packing boxes in silence, her empire crumbling piece by piece. The rest of the board resigned within 48 hours. And the neighborhood? We took a vote. Unanimous. The HOA was officially dissolved. For the first time in years, the neighborhood exhaled. No more surprise inspections. No more absurd fines for leaving a trash bin out an hour too long, or having the wrong kind of flower pot on your porch. The fear that had ruled every cul-de-sac, every backyard barbecue, every porch conversation was gone. But I wasn't celebrating just yet. There was one final piece of unfinished business: rebuilding my home. I returned to the lot that had once been filled with memories, now just flattened dirt and splinters. I stood in the center, the breeze rustling through what was left of a tree my dad planted when I was a kid. My childhood, my legacy, had been bulldozed on Patricia's word. But that wasn't the end of the story. Not for me. Leonard joined me with 2 steaming coffees. "You really going through with it?" he asked, handing one over. I nodded. This was my dad's house. She might have destroyed the structure, but she didn't erase what it meant. I'd already spoken with a contractor who specialized in restoration builds. He was coming by the next day to assess the land and help determine what could be salvaged. Leonard just stared out at the emptiness, then looked at me with a mixture of regret and respect. "This place deserves better," he muttered. He was right, and as I looked around, I realized something else too. Without Patricia's rules, the neighborhood was coming back to life. Kids rode bikes again. Neighbors leaned on fences, laughing. Yard sales popped up on Saturdays without anyone policing sign sizes or font choices. It was a new beginning for all of us. Vincent, the contractor I'd hired, pulled up right on time, clipboard in hand, hard hat already on. He stepped out of his truck, took one long look at the property, and whistled low. Damn, they really leveled it. "Yeah," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. "But we're building something better." He walked the perimeter with practice steps, occasionally scribbling notes or tapping on exposed concrete. "Utilities are mostly intact," he observed, "but your foundation's toast. We'll need to pour a new slab. Wiring's got to be replaced from scratch." I nodded. I want it built to last this time. Reinforced. Strong enough to survive anything or anyone. He grinned. "You're talking fortress style." "Huh? I like it." Just then, Leonard pulled up in his truck, a rolled-up set of documents in his hand. He handed them to me with a knowing look. "Got these from my buddy at City Planning. Your dad's original schematics." I unrolled the faded blue paper and stared at the familiar outlines. The living room where I took my first steps. The porch where my parents sipped coffee every Sunday. His handwriting danced along the margins. Notes about wood grain, preferred finishes, insulation tweaks. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "We're rebuilding it the same way." I said, "Exactly the way he intended it." Leonard nodded, then added, "With a few upgrades, of course." And so the real work began. Over the next few days, the crew arrived with tools and grit. The wreckage that Patricia had caused was cleared. A new foundation was poured, solid, unwavering. Walls began to rise. What was once a pile of shattered memories slowly took shape into something stronger, prouder, and deeply rooted in legacy. Neighbors stopped by every day, not to complain, but to offer food, lend tools, or just lend an ear. One woman even brought over a box of old photos she'd taken during neighborhood events, some of which showed my house in its prime. "Thought you might want these," she said, smiling. Patricia had tried to erase this place from the map, but now, brick by brick, it was coming back, brighter and bolder than before. Move-in day felt like the closing chapter of a battle-scarred novel. The scent of fresh paint still clung to the walls, and the gleam of newly polished hardwood floors caught the morning sun like a quiet celebration. But this wasn't just about furniture or fixtures. It was about reclaiming something stolen, rebuilding not just a structure, but a sense of peace. Neighbors came by with casseroles, toolkits, and open arms. Kids zipped down the street on their bikes, laughing like they hadn't in years. There were no clipboard-carrying enforcers, no beige HOA flyers tucked into mailboxes threatening citations for unsightly mailbox paint or excessive flower pots. Just people, real, flawed, joyful people, living freely. That night, I stood on the new porch, the same footprint as my father's original, but with stronger beams, storm-proof roofing, and my own hand-carved nameplate above the door. I leaned on a railing and sipped a cold drink, watching the neighborhood settle under the soft glow of porch lights and stars. Leonard joined me, nodding at the rebuilt home. "Looks good, man. Really good." I gave him a sideways grin. "Feels good." He raised his bottle and clinked it against mine. "You turned a demolition into a declaration." I laughed, genuinely this time. I guess I did. Then we stood there in companionable silence, listening to the sound of the neighborhood finally breathing again. Patricia? She was long gone, facing legal consequences, financial ruin, and the slow burn of being forgotten by a community that no longer feared her. Developers that once circled like vultures had been chased off by a united front of homeowners who now knew the power of their collective voice. And as for the future, we weren't naive. We knew there would always be threats, schemes, lawsuits, some who thought they could outsmart the will of the people. But we were ready now. Vigilant, organized, unbreakable. This wasn't just a house. It was proof that when you stand your ground with integrity, with community behind you and truth on your side, Tyranny, no matter how well-dressed or deceptively sweet, will always fall. And from the ashes of what was taken, something better can always rise. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and tell us, if your home was threatened, how far would you go protect it?